There is a type of firewall called a stateful firewall. This works by looking at connections. Connections, not just the IP port. Okay? So for example, it can detect a SYN flood because it can look and it knows what a SYN packet looks like. And it knows that when you send out a connection, it's a SYN packet. Okay? And it'll look and it'll see if that was a SYN. Our firewall here, we might have people, remember we have this thing where it allows the stuff from our network to go out. It's possible that we could have our computer sending out things that weren't SYN that they're not opening connections, that they're actually replying to things. But anyway, I'll just note that. So it can detect SYN floods. It can, well, that's good enough. What else do we worry about here? Yeah. So that's good. I think that's good enough for a stateful firewall. And then the final thing, I'm just going to skip to a new thing. The final type of a firewall is actually, sometimes they call this an intrusion detection system. Sometimes it's an IDS. But what this does is called deep packet inspection. So here we're looking at the actual application messages. All right? So what is actually going on in the packets or the application messages? So here's just an example. If I have BitTorrent, it has a certain port number. And I'm just going to put one down. It's like 5472, let's say. So by default, BitTorrent goes on port 5472. If the firewall blocks, the user can just change. Question mark. And let's say they change it to 5547, okay? And now all of a sudden we were blocking 5472. They've started blocking a new, or they've started using a new port, and now we aren't blocking that port. And so in some time we have to figure out what port they're using, and there's no way to do it unless you're looking at application layer messages. So that's just pretty much it. And so with one of these type of systems, you can say, for example, if I see an HTTP message, I can make sure it's on port 80. Okay? So if we look back here, remember with my firewall, I would allow any packet going to this server on port 80, it would just be allowed. With a system like this, I can actually say, okay, if it's port 80, it better be HTTP traffic, or I'm either going to block it, or usually these send an alarm is what happens. Okay? I'll just note that. But you can, they call them an IPS, intrusion prevention system. That would be where they just block. The alarm goes off to an administrator. So usually if, for example, you start seeing HTTP messages on port 80, or non-HTTP messages on port 80, there will be, it's not just a log, it's usually like they get an email or something. Like something more serious than just a log. All right, so usually they get an alarm. But again, you can block them. All right, this can also detect some more exotic things. And one of the fun ones that you'll hear probably a lot about is SQL Injection. Okay. An SQL Injection attack, I will show you right now. Okay. But what happens here is I'm putting some SQL in, for example, an HTTP message. Okay. And what happens is, and I'll just put it right here. Let's say I have a web form and I put a username and then a password. All right. Now, if I wanted to check when they log in, and we all know about the hashing and everything, right? When I want to check if that username matches the password, I can use an SQL query. So I might do select username, comma, password, where, you guys seen this stuff before? Username equals, I got to put a single quote. You guys have done this, right? Then I put whatever they entered in there goes into that form, or into that value. And then I put an and, password equals, and then I put there whatever they put into the password field. Right? This seems pretty straightforward, right? You guys have been in database? Pretty straightforward stuff. You guys remember on Heartbleed, what was the problem that the guy did? He did not validate, you guys remember that? He didn't validate one of the fields. So what happens with an SQL injection is up here in user, they can type in something like, oh, I forgot my from. Oh, you guys. From customer, see? It's nice to have people that have had database now, huh? Or you're in it now. You've gotten this far, right? Okay, from customer. Sorry. All right, so say in this field up here, instead of putting an actual username, I put in a single quote, then I type in or 1 equal 1. Then usually you put or 1 equal and then another quote. Okay? You guys see that? What's the difference between and or in database? And has to be both, or has to be one or the other, okay? Now, you might not know this about your database, but as it goes through row by row, and it sees which rows meet the criteria. And if you have a criteria that's 1 equal 1, is that true or false? It's always true. So for every row, that 1 equal 1 ends up being true. And so what will happen here, for example, is they'll see, so they've injected that in, they won't get a syntax error. I'm not going to write it in. They won't get a syntax error, that's why there are these single quotes. And then the or 1 equal 1 will return just any random row. A lot of times the first row which sometimes is admin, which is a really sweet row to get. Okay? So then you're logged in as that, right? Okay? So the rule here is, you guys remember, validate every field. Anytime a user can touch something, you need to validate it. So you're going to do things here like if they type in a single quote, you convert, there's commands you can use this, but you convert all of those to their ASCII equivalent. And then you actually put the ASCII into the database, which ends up being kind of funny because anyway, you end up logging most of this stuff too. There's other injections you can do. So I can put in a single quote, select, I don't know, username. If you have a really bad website, and then you come up with something else with another quote, you can actually inject another SQL command in there, which is totally awesome. And so there's times where you can have, for example, if it's a catalog website and they're supposed to show a list of things, if someone can SQL inject you, they can go into your catalog and have your catalog return, instead of the fields of your item table, they have it return the fields of your customer table. I'm not going to hack anyone. I'll put this here. Don't do this at home. Okay? You can do it to your own. Vulnerability testing is okay, but yeah, you don't want to be the one that does this. There are lots of stories. This is a felony, you guys, when you do. All of a sudden you get all these usernames, leak them out. It's education, that's right. That's right, we need more education. So that's just an example of an SQL injection attack.